For more than a century, the American dream stood as the most powerful myth in modern history. It promised that no matter where you were born, who your parents were, or how much money you had, you could rise, through hard work, ambition, and persistence, to a life of prosperity and freedom. The phrase carried hope for millions of immigrants who crossed oceans and borders, chasing that promise. It fueled innovation, economic growth, and the belief that America was not just a place, but an idea, a promise of opportunity. But somewhere along the way, that promise began to crumble. The dream that once lifted generations has become increasingly unreachable for millions of Americans. What was once a symbol of hope has turned into an illusion, one that hides the deep cracks in the foundation of modern America. To understand how the American dream died, we have to look back at how it began. In the early 20th century, industrialization transformed the United States into an economic powerhouse. Millions of immigrants arrived through Ellis Island, finding work in factories, farms, and cities that were bursting with opportunity. Wages were modest, but the cost of living was low. A single income could support a family, own a home, and still save for the future. For many, that was the American dream: stability, dignity, and the chance to do better than your parents. After World War II, America reached its peak. The 1950s and 60s were the golden age of the middle class. Suburban homes expanded across the country. Education became accessible, and blue-collar jobs paid enough to live comfortably. The GI Bill gave millions of returning soldiers access to college and home loans, creating a generation of prosperity. The dream wasn't perfect. It often excluded minorities, women, and the poor, but it was alive. There was faith in progress, in hard work, and in the belief that tomorrow would always be better than today. But starting in the late 1970s, something shifted. The economic model that built America began to change. Factories moved overseas in search of cheaper labor, automation replaced human workers, and the rise of corporate power began to reshape the economy. Wages stopped growing, even as productivity soared. The wealth created by American workers no longer flowed to them, it concentrated at the top. For the first time in decades, the gap between the rich and everyone else began to widen. By the 1990s, the dream was already fading. The cost of education skyrocketed, housing prices exploded, and healthcare became unaffordable for millions. The middle class that once defined America began shrinking. Families that once needed only one income now required two, and still struggled to make ends meet. The dream of owning a home, sending kids to college, and retiring comfortably became a fantasy for many working Americans. The Great Recession of 2008 delivered the final blow to whatever hope remained. Millions lost their homes, their jobs, and their savings. Banks were rescued, but ordinary people were not. The crisis revealed something deeper, that the system itself was no longer built for fairness, but for protection of wealth and power. Since then, the so-called recovery has lifted stock markets, but not people. The top 1% gained trillions, while wages for most remain stagnant. Today, the numbers tell a grim story. Over 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Student debt has crossed $1.7 trillion, trapping young people before they even begin adult life. The cost of housing has outpaced income growth by over 400% in some states. Millennials and Gen Z, despite being the most educated generations in history, are less likely to own homes or achieve financial independence than their parents. For many, the dream has become a cycle of rent, debt, and survival. The erosion of the American dream isn't just economic, it's cultural and psychological. A growing sense of hopelessness now defines the national mood. Depression, anxiety, and loneliness have reached historic highs. Communities once held together by stable jobs and local pride have been hollowed out by corporate consolidation and political division. Small towns have vanished, replaced by empty malls and shuttered factories. Cities are divided between glittering wealth and desperate poverty, often just a few blocks apart. And while technology has connected people digitally, it has also deepened the isolation. Social media shows a distorted version of success, creating a false sense of what the dream should look like. Instead of opportunity, there's envy. Instead of progress, there's pressure. The American dream has turned into a competition, one that only a few can afford to play. In politics, both sides still sell the illusion. Every election season, candidates promise to bring back the dream, but the reality is that the system is no longer designed for upward mobility. The education system produces debt, not opportunity. The housing market benefits investors, not families. The healthcare system prioritizes profit, not care. And the job market rewards automation and outsourcing, not loyalty and hard work. The truth is, the American dream didn't just die, it was taken. Taken by decades of policy choices that favored corporations over communities, speculation over stability, and short-term profit over long-term well-being. Yet, despite all this, the myth survives. It continues to draw immigrants and inspire hope, even as the evidence against it grows stronger every year. Because the dream at its core was never just about money. It was about belief. Belief that tomorrow can be better than today. That belief is what built America. But belief alone cannot rebuild it. The proof is everywhere, in the unaffordable homes, the empty savings accounts, the millions juggling multiple jobs, and the growing despair of generations who feel abandoned by the promise that once defined their nation. The American dream isn't dead because people stopped working hard. It's dead because the system stopped rewarding hard work. And until that system changes, the dream will remain exactly that, a dream.
The fall of opportunity. The 21st century began with promises of innovation and global progress, but what followed was a slow and quiet collapse of the very structure that held the American dream together. The rise of technology, globalization, and financial power concentrated wealth in ways unseen before in human history. The dream that once celebrated the dignity of labor was replaced by a digital economy that rewarded algorithms over effort and speculation over skill. Automation reshaped industries faster than society could adapt. Machines replaced factory workers. Software replaced clerks. Artificial intelligence began replacing analysts, writers, and even teachers. The promise of technology was to make life easier, to free people from repetitive labor, but in practice, it displaced millions while enriching a few. Entire professions vanished in a decade, leaving behind a generation of workers retrained not for purpose, but for survival. Corporations began to operate without borders, while people remained bound by rent, loans, and local economies. The global supply chain made products cheaper, but it also exported jobs, eroded labor rights, and destroyed local manufacturing. In towns that once thrived on steady industrial work, factories became ruins, their parking lots overgrown, their machinery sold for scrap. Small businesses that once symbolized the spirit of entrepreneurship were swallowed by corporate giants. The corner store became a chain, the chain became an app, and the app became a monopoly. The wealth that once circulated through communities now funnels upward through a handful of corporations. In America today, just 1% of the population owns more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. Billionaires control not only money, but influence, shaping policies, funding campaigns, and steering national debates. The political system, once seen as the protector of democracy, has become an extension of corporate interests. Lobbying now determines legislation. Donations determine elections. The average citizen's voice, once the core of democracy, is drowned out by the sound of money. For ordinary Americans, the cost of simply existing has become unbearable. The price of housing in major cities has reached absurd levels, forcing millions into lifelong renting. A college degree, once a ticket to stability, now means decades of debt. Medical bills are the leading cause of bankruptcy in the world's richest country. Even food, the most basic human necessity, has become a source of anxiety as inflation eats away at wages that have barely changed in 40 years. The illusion of prosperity remains, maintained through credit cards and consumerism. Americans are told to spend their way into happiness, even as they drown in debt. A cycle of borrowing and repayment has replaced the sense of financial independence that once defined success. Ownership of homes, cars, or businesses has become rare. The dream has been replaced by a subscription model, where everything, even stability, must be rented. Generational inequality has widened the divide further. For the first time in modern history, younger Americans are expected to have a lower standard of living than their parents. Many live with family well into adulthood, not out of choice, but necessity. The idea of retirement has become unrealistic for millions who cannot afford to stop working. The once powerful promise of work hard, retire well has turned into work until you die. And beneath the statistics lies something more profound, a loss of meaning. The dream that once gave purpose to work and sacrifice has vanished. In its place is a culture of exhaustion and quiet despair. The average worker spends most of their life chasing stability that never comes. The harder they work, the further they fall behind. The psychological collapse. This erosion of hope has triggered a national mental health crisis. The suicide rate has climbed sharply, especially among middle-aged Americans who once formed the backbone of the working class. Drug addiction, particularly opioids, has ravaged entire regions. The term deaths of despair now describes a growing demographic of Americans dying not from disease, but from hopelessness. Social mobility, the measure of how easily one can rise in class and income, has collapsed. In the mid-20th century, the United States led the world in mobility. Today, it ranks behind countries like Denmark and Canada. A child's future is now more dependent on their zip code than their ambition. In a society built on meritocracy, the game is now rigged before it begins. Education, once seen as the great equalizer, has become the great divider. Elite universities, funded by billion-dollar endowments, admit a fraction of students while charging record tuition. Public schools, especially in low-income areas, suffer from underfunding, overcrowding, and outdated materials. Students graduate not empowered, but indebted, paying for knowledge that no longer guarantees opportunity. Healthcare tells a similar story. While the United States spends more on healthcare than any other nation, millions remain uninsured or underinsured. The system, built around profit, turns illness into an opportunity for revenue. Pharmaceutical companies set prices beyond reason, and hospitals operate like corporations, prioritizing billing codes over care. For many, one medical emergency is enough to destroy a lifetime of savings. The decline of trust is perhaps the most visible symptom of the dream's death. Trust in government, media, corporations, and even one another has plummeted. Americans no longer believe that those in power will act in their interest. The social contract, that unspoken agreement between citizens and their country, has been broken. In this new reality, survival has replaced ambition. People measure success not by prosperity, but by endurance. Making it no longer means achieving wealth or comfort. It means avoiding collapse. The dream has shifted from aspiration to maintenance. And yet America continues to project the image of success. Its culture, technology, and entertainment still dominate the world, selling the illusion that opportunity awaits anyone who dares to dream. But behind the screens and skylines lies a nation where millions struggle for basic security. The American dream, once a ladder of opportunity, has become a mirage in the desert, visible from afar, but vanishing upon approach. Still, there are pockets of resistance. New movements have emerged, workers unionizing against tech giants, communities rebuilding local economies, young Americans redefining success in non-material ways. Some reject the old dream entirely, choosing meaning, sustainability, and balance over wealth and competition. These voices represent a quiet rebellion, a refusal to believe that the dream must remain dead. But whether this new awakening can rebuild what was lost remains uncertain, because the structures that killed the dream, inequality, corruption, greed, are deeply entrenched. They are not flaws in the system, they are the system.
The illusion of revival has infiltrated every corner of American society. In recent years, politicians and media outlets have insisted that the American dream is not lost, that prosperity is just around the corner, that opportunities abound for those willing to seize them. Headlines celebrate stock market highs, tech billionaires, and corporate growth. But for the vast majority of Americans, these triumphs are irrelevant. Wealth concentrated at the top does not trickle down, it trickles past. The illusion of revival is maintained by showing a few success stories while ignoring the millions who struggle. Even the most celebrated aspects of American progress, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and elite universities, often reinforce the divide. Startups promise innovation, yet many of the brightest young minds are trapped in debt before their ideas can take flight. Stock market growth is touted as national prosperity, yet only a fraction of the population owns significant equity. Housing markets recover in the news, while working families are priced out of the neighborhoods where opportunity supposedly lives. These examples create a narrative that the dream is alive, but the reality is far more grim. The labor market, once the backbone of social mobility, has become precarious. Gig work and short-term contracts have replaced stable employment for millions. People are no longer paid for loyalty or skill, but for flexibility, a euphemism for insecurity. Many work multiple jobs just to afford rent, health care, and basic necessities, leaving little room for education, savings, or advancement. For them, survival has replaced ambition. Inequality extends beyond money. It is racial, geographic, and generational. Communities that once formed the bedrock of American opportunity, small towns, working-class neighborhoods, and industrial cities, have been hollowed out. In rural areas, access to quality education, health care, and jobs is often non-existent. In urban centers, the rich and poor live side by side, but worlds apart, separated by invisible barriers of wealth and privilege. The promise that hard work could elevate anyone is now contingent on where one is born, who one knows, and how much one already has. The political system, meant to address these divides, has failed to do so. Lobbyists and campaign donations shape policy more than citizen needs. Social programs meant to support the vulnerable are stripped down or privatized. Wealthy elites influence education, health care, and taxation, ensuring that the structures reinforcing inequality remain intact. The dream is no longer a promise from the nation. It has become a product of the few who control the nation. Even socially, the consequences are profound. Americans feel a pervasive sense of despair and mistrust. Communities fracture as inequality grows. People isolate themselves in digital spaces where comparisons and envy intensify feelings of failure. The dream's collapse has left a vacuum, a void once filled with hope and purpose, now occupied by fear and anxiety. Mental health crises, addiction, and family stress are evidence not only of economic collapse, but of a deeper social and emotional breakdown. Some argue that technological advancement could restore opportunity. Automation,
Artificial intelligence and digital economies could, theoretically, create new wealth and jobs. Yet history has shown that these advancements often favor those who already have resources and capital. Without systemic reform, innovation alone will not repair the damage. The wealth created by technology continues to concentrate at the top, leaving the masses with jobs that are temporary, low-paying, or obsolete. The American dream, in its original form, is no longer attainable. It is a relic of a bygone era, when the nation's economy and institutions were aligned to reward effort and ambition. Today, effort is no longer the decisive factor. Circumstance, privilege, and access determine success. The dream survives in stories, in marketing, and in the memory of older generations, but for millions of Americans, it has become a cautionary tale. Yet, even in this bleak reality, the idea of the dream persists because hope is difficult to extinguish. Immigrants still arrive believing in opportunity. Young people still strive for education and innovation. Communities still fight for equity and justice. These acts of resilience demonstrate that while the traditional American dream is dead, the human desire for improvement, for fairness, and for prosperity endures. The challenge, then, is systemic. Rebuilding opportunity requires more than personal effort. It requires structural change, reforming education, health care, labor rights, taxation, and political influence. Without addressing these foundations, the dream will remain out of reach. Success will continue to depend not on merit, but on inheritance, connections, and timing. In conclusion, the American dream is not a distant memory, but a warning. It is proof that prosperity cannot exist without equality, security, and purpose. It is a reminder that a society built on myth and illusion will ultimately fail those who believe in it. The dream has died because the system that upheld it has been dismantled, piece by piece, by policies, greed, and neglect. The proof lies in the lives of millions who work tirelessly, yet cannot achieve stability, in the generations trapped by debt and inequality, in the communities left behind by globalization, and in the hollow promises of politicians and corporations. The American dream is not merely a concept. It is a mirror reflecting the reality of a nation that once promised everything, yet delivered far less. Whether the dream can ever be revived is uncertain. What is clear, however, is that believing in it without confronting the structural collapse will continue to leave Americans chasing an illusion, hoping, striving, and struggling in a system that no longer rewards those who work the hardest. The American dream is dead, and its proof is visible in every corner of the nation, from struggling towns to overcrowded cities, from indebted youth to exhausted workers.